David Coleman stood calmly at the returns counter, a small boxed item and a printed receipt placed neatly in front of him. He'd been in the store for just over 4 hours by that point, though nothing about his presence suggested anything unusual. A man in a plain gray button-down and dark slacks, unremarkable in every visible way, moving through the store earlier that morning with the specific unhurried attention of an ordinary shopper. He'd purchased the item himself 2 hours ago, with cash, and had returned now to complete the second half of a process he'd walked through dozens of times before in dozens of other stores, in dozens of other cities, under dozens of other names on his temporary visitor badge. A few feet behind him, close enough to observe but far enough to remain unremarkable, a young woman stood with a tablet held loosely in both hands, her attention apparently on the device, her posture the specific practiced casualness of someone who had learned, over months of training, exactly how to be present without drawing attention to her own presence. Denise Whitfield, mid-conversation with another store associate about an unrelated scheduling matter, turned toward the counter with visible irritation already present on her face before David had said a single word. "This receipt's altered," she said, barely glancing down at the paper in front of her. "I've seen this scam before." "It's not altered," David said. His voice stayed even, unhurried. "I'd like to speak with someone else, if you're not able to process this." "Excuse me? I'd like your name, please, for a formal complaint." The slap came fast, sharp, entirely without warning, Denise's open palm connecting with David's jaw before either of them, or the young woman standing quietly behind him with her tablet, fully registered what had happened. "Get out!" Denise said, her voice already climbing toward something unsteady. "Now!" She had no idea the entire interaction, including that slap, was already being documented in real time, by a woman she hadn't thought to notice, for a report that was going to determine whether this store still existed in 6 months. If something about this moment already has your full attention, if you can feel exactly how wrong this is, hit the like button right now. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we tell stories like this one every single week. Drop your country in the comments and let us know where in the world you're watching from. We read every single one. Now, let's understand exactly who David Coleman is and why he was standing at that counter in the first place. That morning had started, for David and his colleague Priya Anand, the specific unremarkable choreography of an unannounced site visit, the kind of ordinary Tuesday that neither of them would ever describe as ordinary once it was over. They'd entered the store separately, 20 minutes apart, exactly as protocol required. David moved through the aisles the way any customer might, picking up a few items, comparing prices, taking his time in a way that felt entirely natural to anyone watching, because David had, in fact, spent 9 years learning exactly how to move through a retail floor without drawing a single ounce of unnecessary attention. He purchased a single small item near the front of the store, paid in cash, and tucked the receipt carefully into his jacket pocket. Priya trailed behind at a professional distance, her tablet already recording small, unremarkable observations. An understocked shelf near the back, a genuinely friendly cashier at Register 3, the general baseline texture of a store functioning, on the surface, exactly as it should. 9 years earlier, a much younger David had stood on a different store floor entirely, watching from a respectful distance as a different manager, different store, different city, same specific pattern of unexamined certainty, accused an elderly customer of shoplifting over what turned out to be a simple misread price tag. David had been 19 at the time, a junior associate with no authority to intervene, and he remembered, with the specific clarity certain memories never fully lose, apologizing to that woman quietly afterward, because it was the only thing he'd had the power to actually do. He had built the next decade and a half of his career, in part, around eventually having more power than an apology. That morning, before entering the store, David had reviewed his notes one final time in the parking lot. The specific, unhurried thoroughness of a man who took this work seriously, precisely because he remembered what powerlessness felt like from the other side of it. He'd briefed Priya once more, the same brief he gave every new auditor shadowing him for the first time. "We're not here to catch anyone," he'd told her. "We're here to see what's actually true." Back at the returns counter, the full context of Denise Whitfield's morning had already been building for hours before David ever approached. 2 earlier disputes, a defective appliance return that had turned genuinely heated, and a pricing disagreement that had escalated over what amounted to a $2 discrepancy, had both been resolved not through actual resolution, but through Denise simply overpowering the other party with volume and unwavering confidence until they gave up and walked away. It had worked, in the sense that both disputes had technically ended. Neither had actually been handled correctly, and Denise, 6 years into a management role she'd been given largely on the strength of sales numbers rather than any formal training in de-escalation, had never once been meaningfully corrected on the pattern. David's return, entirely legitimate, entirely compliant with the store's own posted policy, arrived at her counter at exactly the wrong moment, in exactly the wrong morning. "This receipt's altered. I've seen this scam before," she said, not actually examining the paper in front of her. David kept his tone level, the specific measured patience of a man trained to ask questions in a way that revealed information without adding heat to a situation that already had too much of it. "It's not altered. This is the item I purchased 2 hours ago, with this receipt, following your posted return policy." "I don't have time for this," Denise said, already half turning away. "I'd like to speak with someone else, if you're not able to process this correctly," David said, still calm, still precise. Denise's expression sharpened instantly. "Are you calling me incompetent? I'm asking to speak with someone else." Denise raised her voice now, the specific performance of someone who had learned that volume, delivered confidently enough, usually ended disputes faster than actually checking the underlying facts, and who was, whether she fully realized it or not, performing now for the small audience beginning to gather nearby. A cashier at the adjacent register, 2 customers who'd paused their own transactions to watch. "I don't need to justify my decisions to you," she said. "This return is denied. You need to leave." "I'm not trying to cause a problem," David said. "I'm asking you to follow the policy that's posted right there." He gestured, calmly, toward a laminated sign mounted near the counter, the store's own return policy, printed in plain, unambiguous language. Denise didn't look at it. "I know the policy. I run this store. Then you know this return should be processed." Something in David's continued, entirely unshaken calm seemed to agitate Denise further, rather than diffuse anything. The specific frustration of a woman accustomed to ending confrontations through sheer force of will, now facing a customer who simply refused to escalate to match her energy, who kept his voice at exactly the same volume no matter what she did with hers. "I'd like your name, please," David said, "for a formal complaint. Right here, before you see what happens next. Subscribe if you haven't already." Because the next 30 seconds are the entire reason this story exists. Hit the bell. Drop your country in the comments. We're reading every single one. Now, watch closely. My name? Denise's voice cracked upward, sharp and sudden. You want my... She didn't finish the sentence. The slap came fast, entirely without warning. Her open palm connecting with David's jaw with enough force that the sound cut clean through the store's ambient noise. Sharp enough that the small gathered audience went completely, immediately silent. David didn't move for a moment, didn't raise his voice, didn't step back, didn't reach for anything. One hand rose slowly to his jaw, not clutching it, simply resting there, the specific composed absorption of a man who had just been struck and was choosing, with visible deliberateness, not to react the way the moment might have otherwise demanded. "Get out," Denise said, her voice shaking now, adrenaline overriding whatever remained of her earlier control. "Now. I don't want you in my store." This was the lowest point of the entire encounter, not because anything worse was about to happen physically, but because the specific public violence of what had just occurred had landed completely, undeniably, in front of witnesses. And Denise had not once, even now, in the immediate aftermath, paused to consider that she might be wrong. A few feet back, Priya Anand had kept recording throughout, her hands steady on the tablet despite the visible shock on her own face. The entire incident, now existing as time-stamped, professional documentation, captured the instant it happened, rather than reconstructed afterward from memory or hearsay. David lowered his hand from his jaw, looked at Denise directly, his expression carrying none of the anger the moment might have justified. "I need you to know something," he said. Quiet, even. The exact same register he'd used through the entire interaction, which somehow made it land harder than any raised voice could have. "My name is David Coleman. I'm a senior auditor with corporate. I've been documenting this visit since I walked into this store 4 hours ago." He nodded toward Priya, who stepped forward, tablet still held steady in both hands. "This is Priya Anand. She's been recording observational notes the entire time, including what just happened." Denise's face moved through several rapid changes in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, and then something with nowhere comfortable left to land. "You're... what?" "I came in to test your return process," David said. "That's standard procedure. What happened after that wasn't part of the test. That was just you." "I didn't..." "You have to understand. It's been a difficult morning," Denise started, reaching immediately for justification rather than accountability, the specific reflex of someone caught with nothing prepared for this exact scenario. "I understand you've had a difficult morning," David said. "That's not why I'm here, and it's not why this happened. This happened because you decided, without checking a single fact, that I was lying. And when I asked for your name to file a complaint, you hit me." The small crowd that had gathered, the cashier, the 2 customers who'd paused their own transactions, stood in complete, stunned silence, watching the entire dynamic of the last several minutes reorganize itself around what they'd just learned. Is my job," Denise started, her earlier confidence entirely, visibly gone. "That's not my decision to make alone," David said. "But this interaction, along with everything Priya has documented today, is going directly into the audit report. What happens next depends on what that report shows, and on whether this is a pattern or an isolated incident." David didn't have Denise removed on the spot, didn't perform a dramatic, public firing that would have simply mirrored the exact cruelty of what had just happened to him. Instead, he asked, calmly, to speak with the assistant manager, explained the standard next steps in the same even tone he'd used throughout, and confirmed that the district office would be in contact within the week regarding the audit's findings. Priya finished her documentation, timestamps, observational notes, the specific unglamorous procedural thoroughness that would make everything that had just happened impossible to dispute or minimize later. They left the store together a few minutes afterward, the specific, quiet, procedural conclusion of a morning that had turned out to be far more serious than either of them had expected when they'd walked in separately, 4 hours earlier, as two ordinary-looking customers with nothing about their presence to suggest anything unusual. In the car afterward, Priya finally spoke, her voice still carrying some of the shock from what she'd just watched. "You didn't even raise your voice," she said. "The whole time." "Wouldn't have helped," David said, checking his jaw briefly in the visor mirror, a faint red mark already forming along the line of his cheek. "And it would have made the report about me instead of about what actually happened in there. Does your jaw hurt?" "Yeah," David said. A small, tired smile crossed his face. Not triumph, something quieter and more permanent than that. "It does." 1 week later, David received a phone call in his office. The audit findings finalized, cross-referenced against 2 prior customer complaints filed against Denise Whitfield in the preceding 18 months, neither of which had been meaningfully investigated at the time. The pattern, once actually examined rather than assumed away, was unambiguous. The franchise's license renewal for that location was being reconsidered pending a change in store leadership. Denise's employment had been formally terminated the previous afternoon. David didn't celebrate the news. He listened to the call, thanked the district compliance officer for the update, and closed the file on his desk. One more folder added to a stack of others he'd completed over 9 years of doing exactly this work. He glanced at his calendar. Another unannounced visit scheduled for the following morning. A different store entirely. A different city. The same quiet, deliberate discipline that had defined his entire career still fully intact. The same specific commitment to making sure the next customer walking into a store carrying his company's name got treated the way the company claimed, on every poster and every training manual, that they would be. He closed his laptop and went home for the day. If David's story stayed with you, if you understand what it means to hold your composure through something that would justify losing it, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already, because we bring you stories like this one every single week. Hit that like button if this one got you. And drop a comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? We read every single one, and we want to know who's out there carrying stories like David carried his. Until next time, the fairest accountability doesn't come from assumption. It comes from complete, documented truth.